Hey there everyone, welcome to new video of Study Azure with me. We've started design governance learning path, and in the previous units we've learned that governance can be applied in different levels. We have to actually build a hierarchy for the organization. It starts from the tenant root group and goes all the way down to each resources, and in the middle we have management groups, subscriptions, and resource groups. Then in other units, we've learned about management groups, we've learned about subscriptions, and today in Unit 5, we've reached finally the resource group. So let's get started and see what resource groups are.
Design for resource groups. Completed 100 XP. 3 minutes. Resource groups are logical containers into which Azure resources are deployed and managed. These resources can include web apps, databases, and storage accounts. You can use resource groups to place resources of similar usage, type, or location in logical groups. Organize resources by lifecycle so all the resources can be created or deleted at the same time. Apply role permissions to a group of resources or give a group access to administer a group of resources. Use resource locks to protect individual resources from deletion or change. Things to know about resource group.
So we've got some important notes in the beginning here. First thing first, again, resource groups are just logical containers, exactly like subscriptions. And the benefit the resource group will give us is that we can group similar resources, for instance, similar by usage, by type, or location. Then this will give us the flexibility of creation or deletion at the same time. I think the keyword at the same time is important here. So every resources inside a single resource group can be administered in terms of creation and deletion at the same time. Then it gives us some flexibility in terms of applying role permissions to group of resources. And so this would again be categorized as the administration benefits of resource groups. And then lastly, we can apply resource locks in order to protect the resources. So protection from deletion, for example, is also another benefit of using resource groups. Let's continue.
Design for resource groups. Completed 100. Things to know about resource groups. As you plan the governance strategy for Tailwind traders, consider these characteristics of resource groups. Resource groups have their own location, region, assigned. This region is where the metadata is stored. If the resource group's region is temporarily unavailable,
so very important here, we're talking about characteristics of a resource group. And again, the text is mentioning Tailwind Traders, which was the fictitious organization that we are basically designing solutions for. And in the first point, I think what's important here is that the resource group has its own location. However, it is only used for storing the metadata about the resource group. That means the resources inside the resource group can have different location, and that's completely fine. So let's continue.
if the resource group's region is temporarily unavailable, you can't update resources in the resource group because the metadata is unavailable. The resources in other regions still.
So again, about location, if the resource group's region is temporarily unavailable, you can't update resources in the resource group because the metadata is unavailable. So the locations of the resources does not have to do anything with the location of resource group. However, if the location that the resource group is based on is going down or has problems, then we cannot update the resources inside, even though the location of resources are in different regions. Why? And the reason is because the metadata of the resource group has been stored in the faulty location. Therefore, we have to wait until that faulty location is recovered.
Resources in the resource group can be in different regions. A resource can connect to resources in other resource groups. You can have a web application.
So again, what I mentioned earlier is also written here. The resources inside the resource group can be in different regions, and that does not have to do anything with the location of resource group itself.
A resource can connect to resources in other resource groups. You can have a web application that connects to a database in a different resource group. Resources can be moved between resource groups with some exceptions. You can add a resource to or remove a resource from a resource group at any time. Resource groups can't be nested. Each resource must be in one, and only one, resource group. Resource groups can't be renamed. Things to consider when creating resource groups.
Okay, so some important information here. First of all, resources inside a resource group can connect to other resources in different resource groups, and that's pretty much obvious because resource group is just a logical container. Then the resources inside the resource group can be moved to another resource group, and that's also another possibility with Azure. However, we've got some exceptions, which is important to note, but I guess we'll come to that later. For example, I think one of the exceptions it is basically referring to is that for virtual networks and virtual machines. Basically, the virtual network has to be in a region that the virtual machine is being hosted. So, if moving to another resource, then that would break the connection between the virtual machine and the virtual network. Okay, but not important for now. Probably for later. Then we can add or remove resources to a resource group freely at any time. This is also pretty much obvious. The resource groups can't be nested. That's important. So nesting can happen, for example, for management groups. The subscription can be inside management groups. Resource group can be inside subscription. However, after resource group, another resource group cannot be nested. So after resource group, we always have the resource itself. Then each resource must be in one and only one resource group. So one resource cannot be related to two resource groups at the same time. That is, I think, also quite logical. And resource groups can't be renamed. So once we selected the name for resource group, it cannot be renamed. Of course, the name doesn't have to do anything with the functionality. It's just a name, but something to note when designing resource groups probably.
Things to consider when creating resource groups. Tailwind Traders has two Azure-based applications, App 1 and App 2. Each application has a web service with SQL database, virtual machines, and storage. You need to decide how to organize the resource groups for Tailwind Traders. Consider group by type. Group resources by type for on-demand services that aren't associated with an app. For Tailwind Traders, you can have a resource group for the SQL databases, SQL RG, and a separate resource group, WebRG, for the web services.
Okay, it's getting more and more interesting. So it's basically mentioning a scenario here. We've got two Azure-based applications, App 1 and App 2. And these applications are using SQL databases, virtual machines, and storage. So we need to have three types of resources. And then we're discussing about how to basically group them into resource groups. So one suggestion is that we can group by type. For example, creating one resource group for SQL databases and call it SQL RG, for example. And then one resource group for all the web services like WebRG. So let's continue for different suggestions.
Consider group by app. Group resources by app when all resources have the same policies and lifecycle. This method can also be applied to test or prototype environments. For Tailwind Traders, App 1 and App 2 can have separate resource groups. Each group can have all the resources for the specific application. Consider group by department, group by location, region, and group.
Okay, so another possibility is that we can group by applications. This way, I think the word lifecycle is important. So this way we can manage the lifecycle of each application and the policies that are assigned to each application. So in this case, we would have, for example, two resource groups. One we call it app one, and the other one we call it app two. And inside each of these resource groups, we put all different type of resources that we need, like the SQL database, the web server, virtual machine, whatever.
Consider group by department, group by location, region, and group by billing, cost center. Review other grouping strategies that aren't common but might be useful in your situation.
Okay, this is also important. Grouping by department, grouping by location or region, and grouping by billing or cost center. I think I remember this last one was one of the most important one for the AZ-104 exam. And that's pretty much the only possibility if we want to have an overview of billing cost by department, for example. In this way, we have to create resource group for the department and then check the cost of that specific resource groups. So this is also another strategy, and it is also mentioning that you can review and investigate other grouping strategies that are not common. But I think these common ones would potentially be something that supports pretty much every organization and every application.
Consider a combination of organizational strategies. Don't restrict your Tailwind Traders strategy to using only a single resource group option. A combination of options is best. Consider resource lifecycle. Design your resource groups according to lifecycle requirements. Do you want to deploy, update, and delete certain resources at the same time? If so, place these resources in the same resource group. Consider administration.
So combination of organizational strategies, I think, is quite clear. We can, of course, use different strategies for different parts. We can use like group by app strategy for two apps, but at the same time, we can use group by type strategy for another application. That's fine. Then the life cycle of the resource. I think this part was quite important, and the very important question that is asked here, like if you want to deploy, update, and delete certain resources at the same time. And if the answer to this question is yes, then we can group those resources into a single resource group so that we have the possibility of updating and deleting at the same time. So in this way, we would design our resource groups according to the lifecycle requirements.
Consider administration overhead. Include overhead planning in your strategy. How many resource groups would you like to manage? Does Tailwind Traders have centralized or decentralized Azure administrators? Consider resource access control. Implement access control for your resource groups. At the resource group level, you can assign Azure policies, Azure roles, and resource locks. Resource locks prevent unexpected changes to critical resources. Consider compliance requirements. Plan to build in support for compliance in your Tailwind Traders strategy. Do you need to ensure your resource group metadata is stored in a particular region? All units complete.
All right, so very important, administration overhead. Of course, it means if you create a lot of, a vast number of resource groups, then there is the administration overhead of managing all of these and keeping track of which resources inside which resource group and so on. Then access control, we can of course assign Azure policies and Azure roles to the resource group itself. So in terms we need grouping flexibility or possibility, then we can group the resources that needs the same Azure policy, for example, in the same resource groups. And also we can apply resource locks to a resource group, and this resource lock would be something that prevents unexpected changes to critical resources. So for instance, the production resources should be protected by resource locks. And then last but not the least, compliance requirements can also be an important factor when designing resource groups. If we need to support certain compliance for certain resources, for instance, if the metadata of a resource should be stored in a particular region, then in this case, having a specific resource group for that is one of the best options. All right, let's continue with the next unit.
Design for resource tags. Completed 100 XP. 4 minutes. Resource tags are another way to organize resources. Tags provide extra information or metadata about your resources. Tip: before you start a resource tagging project, ask yourself what you want to accomplish. Will the tags be used for reporting or billing? Can you use the tags to enable more effective searching for tailwind traders? Maybe the tags can be used in automated scripts. Be sure to clearly define your goals. Things to know about resource.
All right, resource tags. Another possibility of grouping or basically having some resources together. Important information is extra information. Of course, the definition of a tag is essentially extra information or metadata. So if you want to add extra information or metadata to a resource, the good feature for that would be to use resource tags. And the tip here is also very important. Again, we've got the keyword billing here or reporting. So if you need to have special reporting, for example, in terms of how much some certain resources from a certain department is costing, then we can have this extra information attached to those resources using a tag, and then later we can query it. It also gives us the flexibility of searching in Azure. If you need to search for a tag, it's possible. And then another keyword is automated scripts. So tags are something that can be used in automated scripts. So for example, if we need to deploy something via a script, we can always attach a tag to it that this resource has been deployed via these automated scripts. And this way, later when we go to the portal, we immediately realize that this resource hasn't been created by hand on the portal, for example. Okay.
Things to know about resource tags. As you plan the governance strategy for Tailwind traders, consider these characteristics of resource tags. A resource tag consists of a name-value pair. For example, env equals production or env equals dev test. You can assign one or more tags to each Azure resource, resource group, or subscription. Resource tags can be added, modified, and deleted. These actions can be done with PowerShell, the Azure CLI, Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates, the REST API, or the Azure portal. Tags can be applied to a resource group. However, tags applied to a resource group aren't inherited by the resources in the group. Things to consider when creating resource tags.
Okay, important information here in terms of characteristics of resource tags. So a tag is always a combination of a name and a value pair. So it's not just a single string, it's a name and value. Examples are here mentioned here as environment equal to production or environment equal to dev or test. That can be a candidate for a good tag. Then we can have one or more tags assigned to the resources, and the tags can be assigned to resources, resource groups, and subscriptions. Very important, I think. Then resource tags can be added, modified, or deleted. That's a good piece of information. So if we apply a tag by mistake, for example, we can remove it and update it. And tags can be applied pretty much in every way that we communicate with that we interact with Azure, like PowerShell, Azure CLI, ARM templates, REST API, Azure portal, you name it. Then tags can be applied to a resource group. This line, I think, is quite important. Tags can be applied to resource group. We've learned it above in the second line. However, the tags are not inherited. That means if you attach a tag to a resource group and then we create, let's say, 5 resources inside that resource group, that doesn't mean the 5 resources inside the resource group automatically inherits the tags that we have added to the resource group. No, we still, if we need to have the same tag on each of those resources, then still we have to manually add those tags to each of the resources. All right, things to consider.
Things to consider when creating resource tags. You created the organizational hierarchy for Tailwind traders. Now you need to determine which resource tags to apply. Consider your organization's taxonomy. Align your resource tags with accepted department nomenclature to make it easier to understand. Are there recognized terms for compliance or cost reporting for the Tailwind traders organization? Add tags for office locations, confidentiality levels, or other defined policies. Consider whether you need.
So we've got some recommendations here when designing resource tags for the Tailwind traders resources in Azure. Earlier we've decided for management groups and subscriptions inside, and now the tags are here. For example, location, West East, can be a good candidate for having a tag. Classification, whether something is internal, NDA, or whatever. And then each of the products, app 1, app 2, and shared has been tagged this way. So it is suggesting to look for accepted terminologies or recognized terms within the organization and use them for the tags. And this way we are not inventing anything new, but rather we are reusing the information that is already available and it's well known in the system. And then it is also suggesting things like office locations, confidentiality level, or other defined policies are very good candidates for different tags.
Consider whether you need IT-aligned or business-aligned tagging. Implement IT-aligned tagging or business-aligned tagging, or a combination of these approaches to be most effective. Tip: many organizations are shifting from IT-aligned to business-aligned tagging strategies. The following table describes the tagging options in detail. Expand table. Alignment.
So alignment of the tags can be based on IT or based on business, and it is suggesting that if we shift from IT to business aligned tagging, this will give us more flexibility. But of course, that has to be something that is that needs to be examined case by case.
Alignment description example scenarios. IT-aligned. The IT-aligned option is useful for tracking workload, application, function, or environment criteria. This option can reduce the complexity of monitoring assets. IT-aligned tagging simplifies making management decisions based on operational requirements.
All right, so here we have a table that compares, I would say, the pros and cons of IT aligned tagging or business aligned tagging. In IT aligned tagging, it is mentioned that it's useful for tracking workload, application, function, or environment criteria. This option can reduce the complexity of monitoring assets. IT aligned tagging simplifies making management decisions based on operational requirements, of course. Operational requirements are important keyword here. However, for business aligned tagging, we have the description as follows. The business aligned option helps to focus on accounting, business ownership, cost responsibility, and business criticality. This option provides improved accounting for cost and value of IT assets to be overall business. You can use business aligned tagging to shift the focus from an asset's operational cost to an asset's business value. So basically, by using a business aligned tagging, we are moving the focus from operational to the business itself or business value. And this would give us the flexibility of improved accounting, for example, for cost and value of IT assets. Then we've got some example scenarios for IT aligned. Tailwind traders printers are busy 80% of the time. We have five high-speed color printing and should buy more. Use IT line tagging to support printer resource workload and function. Okay, so this is clearly something that the focus is on operational requirements. There is we the printers are 80% busy all the time, therefore we need to buy more. And of course, here we're talking about operational requirements. But business aligned, the example scenario is as follows: the tailwind traders marketing departments uh, uh, tailwind traders marketing department's promotional literature has increased sales revenue 10%. We should invest in more printing capabilities, use business aligned tagging to support marketing resource ownership, accounting, and cost. So here, instead of the operational requirements, we're talking about the business value, um, and the use of the asset basically. So it is saying that the reason behind the high workload on the printers is that the marketing department, has increased sales revenue by 10%. So that's the reason why the business needs more resources. So therefore, we're going to tag these resources based on the business value that these resources are providing, and this would be classified as business aligned tagging strategy. Okay, I think it's quite clear so far.
Consider the type of tagging required. Plan to use different types of resource tags to support the Tailwind Traders organization. Resource tags generally fall into 5 categories: functional, classification, accounting, partnership, and purpose. Expand table. Tag type description example name value.
All right, type of tagging requirement is something that is discussed here. Plan to use different types of resource tags to support Tailwind Traders organization. Resource tags generally fall into 5 categories: functional, classification, accounting, partnership, and purpose. So we've got 5 categories of tags, but then it says generally fall into these 5 categories, so these are not the only categories. Then we've got a table to compare these 5 categories. Functional tags categorize resources according to their purpose within a workload. The tag shows the deployed environment for a resource or other functionality and operational details. For example, app equal catalog search 1 or tier equal web. So these are purely functional related tags. Then classification tags identify a resource by how it's used and what policies apply to it. For example, confidentiality, private, or SLA, 24 hours. So these are clearly classificational tags. If we are classifying the workload in terms of a certain point that is valued and that is known to the organization. Then accounting tags allow a resource to be associated with specific groups within an organization for billing purposes. Yeah, clearly the word accounting indicates that. For example, department equal finance. So every resource that is tagged with department equal finance is for the finance department. Therefore, the cost has to be also associated with the finance department. Program equal business initiative, or region equal North America. That would probably be suitable for an office. If the organization has office in multiple regions and locations, then having this region tag helps in terms of accounting. Partnership tags provide information about the people other than IT members who are associated with the resource or otherwise affected by the resource. For example, owner is somebody, or contact alias is somebody. Stakeholders are user 1, user 2, user 3. So if the organization has partners from outside, then this way we can associate the resources to figure out that the cost this organization is paying for these resources are because of these partnerships. Purpose tags align resources to business functions to better support investment decisions. For example, business purpose equal support or business impact equal moderate. So these are clearly the purpose that this tag or this resource is existing for. Okay, so if a resource has for example, revenue impact high, then we can immediately recognize that this resource is used in one of the top selling products of the organization, for example.
Consider starting with a few tags and then scale out. The resource tagging approach you choose can be simple or complex. Rather than identify all the possible tags required by the Tailwind Traders organization, prototype with just a few important or critical tags. Determine how effective the tagging scheme is before you add more resource tags.
Okay, quite interesting point here. It is mentioning that we do not have to add 50 tags all the way in the beginning when creating the resource. It's better to start with a few tags, with a minimal number of tags, which are only specifying the critical information. And then later in the day, later as the business goes, we can always add new tags. Okay, and this is something we have learned above, that the tags can be added, updated, or deleted at any time. Perfect.
Consider using Azure Policy to apply tags and enforce tagging rules and conventions. Resource tagging is only effective if it's used consistently across an organization. You can use Azure Policy to require that certain tags be added to new resources as they're created. You can also define rules that reapply tags that have been removed. Consider which resources require.
All right, Azure Policy is something that can enforce a tag to be existed on the resource. And this way we can make sure that no resource left over without the tag. Okay, so Azure Policy is one of the possibilities to use in order to define a policy that every resource has to have certain tags, for example.
Consider which resources require tagging. Keep in mind that you don't need to enforce that a specific tag is present on all Tailwind Traders resources. You might decide that only mission-critical resources have the impact tag. All non-tagged resources would then not be considered as mission-critical.
All right, another important suggestion here. Consider which resources require tagging. It happens a lot of time that we need to create some resources for just some try and errors or creating some spikes that we are, examining something, or we're trying to see if a product is something that we need, that the organization actually need. So in this case, we can say that, okay, we only tag those critical resources that we know they have to exist. And for instance, it is suggesting that we can add an impact tag to those resources. And if there is any resource left over without a tag, then we can immediately recognize that these are not mission critical. These are, for instance, resources created for testing purposes and try and error. Very important point, I think.
Note: to implement an effective resource tagging structure, be sure to seek input from the different stakeholders in your organization. All units.
Okay. The note here, I think it is essentially suggesting that because tags are logical information, essentially, at the end of the day, right? These are not technical information. From IT perspective, all the resources can leave without a tag. Okay, it doesn't matter if we add a tag or not. Still, a virtual machine runs the same way. So tags are only logical information. And therefore, the main use of them would be for stakeholders and for the organization, for the business, not really for IT people. So in this way, because of this reason, it is suggesting that to implement effective resource tagging structure, it is always better to align with stakeholders of the organization. So we need to figure out what resources they have, because at the end of the day, the information would be more important to them rather IT people. All right, so this would mark the end of Unit 6, I believe. And I'm going to end this video here, continue from Unit 7 in future videos. Thanks for sticking around.